Hey everybody. This is a post-script recording. It's a couple of days after I recorded the initial video because some really, really important things have happened in between now and then. I'm adding this to the beginning of the video because I think this might be the most important thing I have said on this channel yet. Later on in the video, I'm going to be talking about Kilmar's case and giving you a lot of background information on him. It's all still accurate. At the end, I talk about an upcoming visit from President Bukele, so I wanted to add a little bit of information for you here about exactly how that went. President Bukele has said that he is not going to willingly return Kilmar to the United States. Afterwards, Stephen Miller, an aide for this administration that has entirely too much say in what this administration does, said that even if Kilmar was returned to us, we would in fact send him back to El Salvador, completely in the face of what the Supreme Court has ordered. Not only that, but President Trump was caught on basically a hot mic saying that he's ready to send homegrown criminals to El Salvador, and they need to go ahead and start building more prisons, build 5 more prisons, because they're going to need the room. Later on, a reporter clarified with him exactly what he meant, and yes, it is as bad as what you might think. He is talking about deporting United States citizens to another country to be held as prisoners. This is no longer an opinion piece. This is no longer me asking for your comments, or if you disagree, I would love to hear from you. This is a constitutional crisis. If you haven't been taking things seriously, now is the time. The administration has said that Kilmar is alive. We have no idea if that's even true at this point. In the next few days, the Supreme Court will likely be making a determination on exactly how far the U.S. administration has to go to return Kilmar. If they do not comply with the Supreme Court's orders, it is the end of democracy. We will no longer have a president of the United States. We will have a dictator. That's not up for debate. The time to take action was months and months and months ago. But the second best time is right now. Contact your local representatives. Tell them that this cannot stand. Let your voice be heard, because your voice matters. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of Awakening the Ordinary. My name is Daniel Clower, and I got some things I want to talk to you about this week. First of all, there are a few executive orders that Trump has released, some of them back when the administration first took office, and some of them as recently as this past Wednesday. All of them are fairly heinous and pretty inconceivable in and of themselves, but when you start connecting the dots between these executive orders, it paints a pretty bleak and disturbing picture. And I frankly have not heard too many people talking about these executive orders in that way. So I just wanted to bring my perspective to it and see what you guys think. Second of all, I wanted to talk about some of these immigration cases that are ongoing. One in particular that I have not mentioned too much on this channel, and a couple that I have brought up before that have significant updates. And then finally, strap in, because we are diving deep into treasury bonds. So get ready for Economics 101, because the entire global financial market was this close to crashing just a couple of days ago. So I want to review exactly what's going on and whether or not you need to start investing in seed and livestock, or if everything's going to be okay. But without further ado, let's begin with item number 1, Donald Trump and his executive orders. So this past Wednesday, the Trump administration released 2 particular executive orders, and they are entitled Addressing Risks Associated with an Egregious Leaker and Disseminator of Falsehoods, that targets a specific U.S. citizen named Miles Taylor. The other executive order I want to talk about is entitled Addressing Risks from Chris Krebs and Government Censorship, which, as you can probably tell from the title, is aimed at a specific U.S. citizen named Chris Krebs. So, first of all, yes, this is absolutely crazy that he is writing executive orders targeting specific individuals. But let's dive a little deeper into exactly what these orders are for. So, both of these orders are aimed at men who were former Trump administration aides in the 2016 administration. Miles Taylor is most well known for having what was at first an anonymous interview, and then later his identity was leaked, so it was no longer anonymous, where he talked about the resistance from the inside of the Trump administration. How essentially there were a group of people working for the Trump administration that still respected rule of law and didn't want the Trump administration to trample all over the Constitution. So they were doing everything that they could legally to ensure that rule of law was followed. He also leaked information about how Donald Trump himself was mishandling classified information, which, by the way, he was found legally guilty by a jury of his peers of illegally mishandling classified information. So none of this was incorrect. Donald Trump is really mad at him for talking about those things. So he released an executive order basically calling him a liar and saying that he is potentially treasonous, stripping him of his security clearance, stripping any known associates of him of their security clearance, including people who just happen to work at the same places he has worked. So, for example, Pennsylvania University is called out by name in this executive order as an institution where people work that may have their security clearance stripped. And probably most disturbing, directing the Department of Justice to investigate Miles Taylor and see exactly what they can charge him with. The executive order for Chris Krebs is very much the same. Chris Krebs worked for the Trump administration in the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, aka CISA. And basically, Chris Krebs' egregious and horrific crime was saying that the 2020 election was not rigged and that Trump lost fair and square. Donald Trump absolutely hates it when people say that he lost fair and square, because he lost fair and square. So he's calling out Chris Krebs for, again, potential treason and misinformation, and basically doing exactly the same thing to Chris Krebs that he did to Miles Taylor. He's stripping his security clearance, disallowing him from entering federal buildings, stripping other people of their security clearance if they're in close association with him, and again, most egregious and disturbing, directing the DOJ to go after him, investigate him, and charge him with whatever they can. So there was another executive order that Donald Trump gave on his very first day in office, where he directed the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to try and get the death penalty on any cases deemed severe enough to deserve the death penalty. One of the possible punishments of treason is the death penalty. So if you are taking him literally, when he says that he thinks that these two men are potentially guilty of treason, he is saying, I potentially want my Department of Justice to kill these people for saying the truth. Hold that thought for a second, because a while ago he released a series of executive orders against law firms. And I mentioned it on this channel, but I want to kind of reiterate exactly what he did with those executive orders. He released a series of executive orders against a few different law firms, and there are likely more coming, where he basically said, we are going to strip anybody who works for these law firms of their security clearance, disallow them from entering federal buildings, we're going to cancel any government contracts that we have with them, and for any other private businesses that we have contracts with, we're going to make them tell us if they're working with those law firms. And if they are, we're going to make them cancel their contracts with them. So essentially what he's doing is trying to kind of isolate and box out these law firms by cutting off access to large amounts of money by basically canceling contracts, and also cutting off other possible revenue streams, because frequently you do need a security clearance to be able to work on certain cases. The reason he has written these executive orders for these various law firms, varies. I mean, sometimes it's because they have lawyers who were involved in investigating him for some of his criminal activity, and he doesn't like that. Sometimes it's because these law firms engage in what he deems is too much DEI, and he doesn't like that. Sometimes it's because these lawyers worked for the Biden administration, and he thinks they're criminals. Again, it's all pretty nonsensical, but that's what he wrote the executive orders for. Now, rewind back to what I was talking about, how he has directed the Department of Justice to investigate these two men. There is, at the very least, a sort of tacit threat that if any law firms dare to try and defend these two men, they're next on the list. He will write an executive order against you. He will box you out and make sure that you lose your revenue streams for doing your job, for defending people from this tyrant. I find it both disturbing and ironic that the party that is supposedly supposed to be about small government and government not interfering in personal lives is also the party that is directly targeting private U.S. citizens with executive orders, threatening them with death, and saying if any law firm dares to defend these guys, they might be next. That is ludicrous. And I promise you, if President Biden or President Obama did any of this stuff, the things that they would have said about President Biden and President Obama would get videos demonetized on YouTube. This is unconscionable. And if you at all hold yourself to any standard of truth or justice, if you at all believe in true conservatism and small government, you cannot possibly support this or this administration. They have crossed a red line and they are going after private U.S. citizens. What more can they possibly do that would convince you they are in the wrong? So with that, I want to go ahead and talk about our next issue. I've talked with you a little bit before about some of these immigration cases that have come up. And I say immigration cases, but essentially the Trump administration has kidnapped and taken away these essentially random group of people, put them on secret planes, and sent them to El Salvador. I have talked with you a little bit before about the issue with essentially kidnapping and sending away on secret planes over 200 men, many of which were Venezuelan, and they were all sent to a prison camp in El Salvador, a particularly infamous prison camp that is well known for abusing inmates and is also frequently used to house gang members. That part is important. It's going to come up in a minute. One case in particular that I have not talked with you much about is the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Kilmar is a father and husband who lived in Maryland. He has 3 children, and his story is a touching one. I want to give you a little bit of background on who he is and everything that we know about him first before I talk about his actual legal case. Kilmar lived with his mother and his older brother in El Salvador. They ran a street stand, a pupusaria, selling pupusas street side, and a gang called the Barrio 18 came by one day to shake them down. They said, essentially, either you have to pay us a bunch of money that you don't have, or you have to let your oldest son join our gang. Well, they didn't really have an option. They didn't have the money. And so Kilmar's older brother was forced to join this gang, the Barrio 18. Fast forward a few years later, and the Barrio 18 came by again. And again, they asked them for money that they didn't have, or for Kilmar's mother to turn him over to the gang and have him initiated. His mother could not bear the thought of allowing him to join this gang, so she sent him away. He was 16 years old, and she sent him across borders to try and make a better life in the United States. At the age of 16, Kilmar came into the United States and essentially tried to live his life as best he could. At the age of 19, he was caught up by immigration and filed for asylum. His asylum request was denied because if you don't file for asylum within 1 year of entering the United States, it's not considered a valid request. Now, I just want to stop here and say I have been 16 before, and when I was 16, I was a knucklehead, and I did not know how the world works. So I personally am willing to extend a little bit of grace to Kilmar and say that maybe this guy from another country might not have understood the inner machinations of the immigration system and that he had to apply for asylum within a certain amount of time. But regardless, his asylum request was denied. However, the judge did say and agree that if he was to be returned to El Salvador, he would be in severe danger from the local gangs. They would want to get revenge on him for essentially running away and dodging them. So the judge said, we're going to put a hold on deporting you. We are not going to deport you. That's that. In fact, specifically, the judge said, we are not going to send you to El Salvador. We are legally barred from sending you back to El Salvador in particular. So fast forward to 2025. It is approximately 15 years since he first entered the United States, and Kilmar has become a productive member of society. He met his wife, got married, had children, has a work visa, and is currently a union apprentice. The only run-ins that he ever had with law enforcement were in his annual checks that were mandated. He still had to show up every year and prove that essentially he was still here and still doing what he was supposed to do, wasn't getting into any trouble. And he wasn't. In 2025, he was stopped at what he thought was a routine traffic stop. They pulled him over and they snatched him up and they sent him away on one of those secret planes to El Salvador, the country that he was previously ruled to not be returned to. The Trump administration has admitted that was an accident. They did not mean to do that. They were not supposed to do that. It was what they call an administrative error. They basically messed up his paperwork. Some wires got crossed, and so they accidentally snatched this guy up, kidnapped him away from his wife and 3 children, and sent him on a secret plane to an infamous gang prison in a country where he is at risk from gangs that he has previously been ordered to not be sent to because he is in so much danger. And then, even after admitting that they made a mistake, instead of saying, oh my gosh, we have to get him back, this is horrific, they basically just waved it off. Ah, well, whatever. Can't do anything about it now. He's in another country. What do you want us to do? He's not in America. We can't do anything with him. He's in another country. First of all, as you will see later, the Supreme Court disagrees. And in specific, Justice Sotomayor pointed out that that is a terrible argument because that means that essentially, if they wanted, they could kidnap anybody in the country, send them on a plane to another country, and as long as they were faster than the speed of the judicial system, as long as they could get them onto foreign soil before a court system said you have to bring them back, then, oh, hands up, there's nothing you can do, sorry. So obviously, that is a ludicrous argument, and thank God it did not stand up in court. The Supreme Court unanimously decided that the U.S. was responsible for facilitating Kilmar's return. I mean, surprise, surprise. A judge already had said he was not supposed to be sent away. So here's to all the MAGA people saying that immigrants don't deserve due process, that Kilmar doesn't deserve to be returned because he's some horrible gang member. Here's to you guys. The Supreme Court of the United States unanimously disagrees with you. And yes, the ruling that they made not only said that Kilmar was supposed to be returned, which he is, but it also said that for every single immigration case, every immigrant is to be afforded due process, which is what I have been trying to say on this channel and what every single person arguing against this kidnapping and excommunication of these men has been saying. None of us are saying you should not be deporting anybody. None of us are saying you should not be deporting gang members or violent criminal offenders or anything like that. We are saying that every single person in this country, regardless of their citizenship status, regardless of anything, is to be afforded due process. That's all we have been arguing for, and that is what the Supreme Court agrees with. So, the Trump administration was ordered to facilitate the return of Kilmar and to update everybody on his status. Because up until this point, we had absolutely no contact with him. His lawyers were not able to reach out to him. His family was not able to reach out to him. It was complete radio silence. And frankly, when you think about it, the fact that all of these men who were kidnapped and sent away on a secret plane have no idea that there is a fervent debate for them right now is horrifying. They are living in a nightmare, not even sure if anybody knows that they're gone, much less that we know where they are and we're trying to get them back. So recently, the US government updated us and said Kilmar is alive. Thank God. They are still, however, saying that their hands are tied. Kilmar is in a foreign country, and we can't go just invade a foreign country and take him back. So what are we supposed to do? Well, right now, the president of El Salvador, who, by the way, is a self-proclaimed popular dictator, is coming to visit the US on Monday. On Monday, he'll be talking with President Trump, and hopefully they will come to some sort of agreement on how to get Kilmar back. But I want to warn you ahead of time, there is one particular word that MAGA is going to be clinging to in the next few days, and that is the word facilitate. The US Supreme Court specifically said that the Trump administration is to facilitate the return of Kilmar. They did not say that they are to effectuate the return of Kilmar. You may be thinking, wow, what a stupid distinction. You're right. However, the Trump administration is saying that that means that they are going to do everything they can domestically, meaning within our borders, to make sure that he has no barriers to being returned. However, they don't have to actually go do anything. They're just going to say that if he gets sent back, then we won't stop him, but we're not going to go actually get him. So keep an eye on this over the next few days. The Supreme Court has until now been really kind of slow playing things with the Trump administration. I suspect it's because they think what most of us think, that if they ever ordered the Trump administration to do something that they absolutely did not want to do, we would be in a constitutional crisis. And I think we are about a hair's breadth away from getting there right now. If the Trump administration declines to return Kilmar, I suspect that Kilmar's team will take it to the Supreme Court yet again, and the Supreme Court is going to have to decide. Are they going to stand up for justice? Are they going to stand up for American citizens and American immigrants? Or are they going to kowtow to the Trump administration? Are they going to say, we don't think the Trump administration is going to listen anyway, so we're not going to tell them to do it? If they tell the Trump administration that they do have to actually effectuate the return of Kilmar, and the Trump administration declines to, the next step would be the U.S. Marshals, who are under the control of the DOJ, bringing in people and arresting them and holding them in contempt of court until the court order is followed. Now, as I said, U.S. Marshals are under the control of the DOJ. However, they are constitutionally obligated to perform this action if the administration goes against the Supreme Court. So at that point, the entire republic would essentially fall on the backs of these U.S. Marshals. Are they willing to follow the Constitution? Are they willing to uphold rule of law? Or has the great American experiment failed? Is this going to be the end of our republic? I want to come before you now and say, I don't think this is the end of the American republic. I do believe that the Trump administration, kicking and screaming, is going to have to return Kilmar home. But I have been wrong before. I think the American people deserve to know how close we are to being under a dictatorship. And these next few weeks are going to be very telling. Now, on another note regarding these immigration cases, I want to talk to you a little bit about Mahmoud Khalil. I spoke with you about him before. He's a green card holder, meaning he is a permanent resident. He's not here on a student visa. He's not an illegal immigrant. He is here permanently as a resident. He is also married, and he was snatched up because when he went to Columbia University, he participated in some protests against Israel's treatment of Palestine. And yet again, I'm going to say, I'm not going to get into the Israel versus Palestine argument. It's nuanced. There's arguments on both sides. It's fine. You can have whatever opinion you have on that. But I do believe in the First Amendment. I do believe that the First Amendment is what makes America great. The fact that America has the strongest free speech protections in the entire world is part of what makes America so special. And the fact is that the Trump administration is trampling all over that currently. And the first way that they really started was by snatching up Mahmoud Khalil, sending him to a detention facility very far away from where he lives so that people wouldn't be able to get in touch with him or know exactly where he was being held, and trying to send him away. He has not been charged with any crimes. And in fact, the federal government has specifically come out and said nothing he's done is illegal. They have said that. It's not illegal to participate in these protests. It's not illegal to have opinions that the president doesn't disagree with. They're being open about that. But what they are saying, and specifically what Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is saying, is that he poses a risk of an adverse foreign policy consequence. Now, is he saying exactly what the consequence would be or how he poses a risk? Absolutely not. So Mahmoud's legal team is obviously trying to fight this. He is still currently being held in the United States in Louisiana, and his legal team has now taken it to a judge. And unfortunately, the judge just made a ruling that she has no authority to question the determination or ask for any proof of the fact that he is an adverse foreign policy risk. She says that that is entirely up to the Secretary of State and that she isn't able to ask for any clarifying information, demand any evidence, or anything like that. She's given his lawyers up until April 23rd to file applications to stop the deportation, but she says after April 23rd, she's going to have him deported. Now, this case may wind up before the Supreme Court as well, depending on exactly how the appeals go and if the Supreme Court accepts the case. But before we get to that level, I just want to chime in and say this is sort of exactly the kind of catch-22 they were talking about with sending people on planes to other countries, where they don't have to have any kind of proof and they can't do anything about it once they're gone. If the Secretary of State is allowed to say that anybody who was not born in the United States is potentially an adverse foreign policy risk with no evidence being required and nothing other than his statement saying that that is the case, then you're saying that the president's administration is allowed to deport anybody at any time that was not born in America. That's what this ruling means, because anybody that they want to be sent away, whether or not they think they are actually a risk of adverse foreign policy consequences, which again is a completely vague term, they can just say it. They could just say it about anybody. They could say it about people who are speaking out against them politically. They could say, Piers Morgan, you're going on the news and talking about us and saying things that we don't like. Well, guess what? You're an adverse foreign policy risk. And so you're being deported and you're being barred from entering the country. And that would be exactly the same as what they're doing to Mahmoud right now, because it's simply for this man exercising his First Amendment right. So I'm not sure how this case is going to pan out. I do know that before April 23rd, we should have some kind of news, and I will be excited to hopefully bring you some good news about it. I'll bring you the news either way. But hold on tight, because things might be getting messy real soon. Now, speaking of messy, it's time to get into economics. So this is extremely dense stuff that I'm going to be talking about. And I am not an economist, and I am not giving any kind of financial advice. So keep that in mind. But I do really want to talk about some of the really strange things that are going on right now in the economy and specifically with our treasury bonds. So, first of all, just to kind of overview the news about it, you guys probably saw that Trump has basically folded like a lawn chair. I mean, he said that he's putting a temporary pause to like the vast majority of all tariffs, other than against China and Mexico and Canada. We are playing serious hardball with China, which is an interesting choice because China is one of our largest trading partners and probably the only economic superpower that we have anything to fear from. And this is an especially interesting choice because while we are alienating every single one of our other trading partners, the only other country that they could viably turn to is pretty much China. So we are playing hardball with China and also pushing all of our allies towards China. So again, I mean, interesting strategic choice, but look, I'm not an economist. I mean, every other economist does think that it's a bad choice, but we'll leave that. For now, I want to talk about why it was that Trump folded so quickly. Because he reaffirmed time after time that he was not going to pause these tariffs. These were staying. But it seems like he changed his mind. So I want to give a brief and layman's terms kind of overview. And partially because if I did try and go into the exact ins and outs of everything, you would probably fall asleep. But basically, treasury bonds are essentially how the US raises money without having to just print more money. It's sort of like selling a loan to the lowest bidder. I'm going to use like round, easy to follow numbers for all of this. These are not like exact numbers or anything, but it gets the idea across for you. So a treasury bond, which you may also hear called a treasury note if it's kind of in the shorter term, is basically somebody, and it's usually going to be like a large investment firm or another country, loaning money to the United States for a set amount of time, and if it's a bond, it's going to be 10 or 30 years, on the promise of getting a percent of interest back. So the absolute highest that the interest has ever been on a US bond was 15.8% back in 1981. It's never been higher than that. And it has actually gone into the negatives, which means that, yes, in the past, some countries have actually paid us to loan us money. And that's basically because U.S. Treasury bonds are considered extremely safe and stable. More safe than just holding on to all of that money yourself. And so if a country has a large enough amount of money just kind of sitting around that is so large that it can't be insured, then in the past they have given that to us as a treasury bond loan, even though we will actually pay them negative interest, which means we basically just take some extra money from them. Now, once you have bought a treasury bond, you can actually sell that bond on a secondary market. Selling it on a secondary market is not really good for the US Treasury because it means that the supply of treasury bonds that are kind of loose in the market increases. And obviously, when supply increases and demand stays the same, that means the price goes down, which in this case basically just means we have to offer higher interest rates for the loans. And by the way, that interest rate is called the yield. So again, like just using kind of round numbers as an example, you might have a country take a 30-year treasury bond at 3.5% for $100 billion. And that means that we are being loaned $100 billion. And over the course of 30 years, we're going to pay them 3.5% back on top of the $100 billion. So as more bonds are sold on the secondary market, the yield, so the interest rate of US Treasury bonds that we offer at auction is forced to go up and rise. Why does any of that matter? Well, 10-year Treasury bonds in particular are considered an international benchmark. Almost any loan that you get in the United States is going to base its interest rate off of what the 10-year bond interest rate is. So if the interest rate for bonds is going up, that means the interest rate for mortgages is going up. That means the interest rate for car loans is going up. That means the interest rate for business loans is going up. So when the U.S. has to increase interest rates on our treasury bonds, everybody in the U.S. also has to pay more on any loan that they get from then on. And not only does every loan that you get in the United States get more expensive because the treasury yield is higher, the stock market also goes down because the treasury is considered so incredibly safe to invest into. If, for example, the 10-year yield on a treasury bond gets to 5% or so, well, the stock market goes up and down, as we have all seen, especially this past week. And so it's volatile. It's risky. A treasury bond is very, very safe. So if you can get a high yield on a treasury bond, it would make a lot of financial sense to sell off your stocks, which decreases stock prices, and instead invest that money into very safe treasury bonds. Here's the thing though. The past couple of weeks, things have been acting really strange when it comes to the bond market, and especially the yield market, which you can actually trade just on the yields. But I'm trying to really simplify it. Someone was selling off bonds like gangbusters. China has about $800 billion in treasury bonds outstanding. Japan is our biggest investor, and they have about $1 trillion in treasury bonds outstanding. Now, you may hear those numbers and think, well, about 2 trillion, that's kind of a drop in the bucket compared to the amount that we have outstanding with other countries. And you're right. But I read this example online. It stuck with me. I think it's a useful example. If in your city, typically speaking, 1% of houses are for sale on the real estate market, the price will usually be pretty stable. Then imagine that a real estate mogul comes in and he wants to just completely dump his inventory, and he's got 2% of the houses in your city owned. Well, if he tries to sell all of his houses all at once, suddenly the amount of houses that are available for sale on the market is tripled. And again, as supply increases, if demand doesn't increase, then the prices will go down. Tripling the amount that's available on the market is a big deal. It's not exactly the same for treasury bonds because that's not exactly how it works, but the idea is generally speaking the same. If somebody is selling a bunch of treasury bonds on the market, that floods what used to be a pretty stable market. And so all of a sudden, the price for treasury bonds goes down. And what that realistically means is that the yield on treasury bonds, the interest rate that the US has to offer to even be competitive, shoots up. So somebody, and again, we don't exactly know who, but somebody was selling bonds like crazy and absolutely tanking their price. Monday, we had one of the largest bond sell-offs in history, and it got worse as the week went on. This was exactly the kind of thing that we saw before the 2008 global recession and before the Great Depression. The issue with that is basically twofold. First, it makes it harder for the US to sell bonds because, again, if people are flooding the market with bonds, it's easy to buy them on the secondary market for a lot cheaper. And you don't necessarily need to go get them from the US directly when you can get them on the secondary market for what will be a shorter term, but the same yield. So we had a 10-year bond sell-off, and we sell bonds at auction at a very regular interval. We have about 300 bond auctions a year. And while this massive sell-off was ongoing, we were having a 10-year bond auction. And basically there were crickets. Nobody was wanting to buy. One thing you need to understand is that large financial institutions in the US are basically built on US Treasury bonds. They use them as kind of their safe foundation. So for example, BlackRock, which is the largest financial institution in the world, owns about $10 trillion of other people's assets that they then invest and use to grow wealth for everybody that trusts them with their money. Now, they are extremely overly leveraged in US Treasury bonds because, again, that has always been considered extremely safe. So let's say they have $1 trillion worth of Treasury bonds. And because the market is now suddenly being flooded with Treasury bonds, suddenly they're worth less. So now the $1 trillion of assets that BlackRock had is not worth $1 trillion anymore. It's worth less. And again, even a 1% drop in value would be enormous when you're talking about numbers as big as $1 trillion. So if BlackRock got margin called on those assets, which basically just means you don't have enough assets in that account anymore to cover the value, they would have to start immediately selling millions, billions, trillions of dollars worth of stocks, which would flood the market and make the stock market absolutely tank, which would then make the stocks that they own lose even more value, which would get them margin called in other accounts and essentially lead to, again, the largest financial crash that the world has ever seen. And all of that would have happened if this 10-year auction bond failed. Luckily, somebody came in at the last second and purchased this 10-year auction bond. And throughout the rest of the week, the bond auctions looked a lot healthier. But genuinely, we were one failed auction away from having absolute economic catastrophe worldwide. The international community owns trillions of dollars in US bonds. I already said Japan and China own almost 2 trillion just by themselves. And they, along with Korea and other Asian markets, have already openly said that they're really mad at us about these tariffs and they're willing to work together to make sure that their economic safety is guaranteed. They know that if they sell off their treasury bonds, they will get in money and it will damage their economy somewhat, but it would absolutely cripple the United States economy if they continued to flood the market with these bonds. We don't know exactly who was selling these treasury bonds, but there is a pretty large list of countries that are really, really mad at us because of these tariffs. And we waltzed right past the F around stage, and we almost made it to the find out stage. So Trump folded. The writing was on the wall, and somebody smarter than him told him, if you don't take away these tariffs, we're going to be building with sticks and stones. Somebody told him that if we didn't stop holding an economic gun to our allies' heads, everything we know was going to collapse. People don't understand that when you threaten these tariffs, that is economic warfare. Warfare. It's not a joke. You can't just back off and say, oops, I'm just kidding. If you pulled out a gun and waved it at somebody, they wouldn't take it as a joke. It's deadly serious. So in some ways, the damage is already done. We already did the big bad thing, and now our allies don't feel safe trading with us anymore. And that is especially compounded by the fact that Trump is just changing his mind at random. And I mean, for example, some breaking news just dropped. He said that we were actually going to cancel some of the tariffs on electronic goods, like phones, computer chips, stuff like that, with China. And then literally the next day, he came out and said on his Truth Social platform that, no, we're not actually going to cancel any of those tariffs. What are you talking about? We're just going to relabel them. I mean, there is no economic stability in the US anymore. Why would people trust our treasury bonds or the word of our president or anything when we don't know what he's going to do on an hour-by-hour basis? He is genuinely a maniac in control of the global economy. So, of course, our allies are going to want to distance themselves. And Europe has already said they are working on building a trading bloc among themselves. They don't want to be reliant on the US anymore. Canada has said they don't want to be reliant on the US anymore. They can't trust us. And so, best case scenario, they start working amongst themselves. They start building components that they need in-house, and they stop trading with the US. And the most likely scenario is that they can't do it all themselves. They don't want to trade with the US, so who do they turn to? China, the country that this is all about. We are shooting ourselves in the foot, and it is all based on the pride and stupidity of our current president. We got a little too big for our britches, and we forgot that the world only revolves around the US as long as it is convenient to. Thank you so much for listening this week. I know we had a pretty dense economic lesson at the end there. I hope you didn't fall asleep. If you have any questions, comments, you agree or disagree with anything, hit me up in the comments section. I would love to hear from you. And again, we have our Discord. It's a burgeoning community, and I would love to chat with you live there. Thank you very much for tuning in, and don't forget, when you change your perspective, your reality changes. I'll see you soon.